And now we're just getting this flood of AI essays. So
madness.
Anyway, we'll talk about that later.
Yeah, sure. Well, we are just going live.
All right.
And hopefully some people will start dropping in. There we go. Kay from Case and Shelf's already popped in to say that she'll miss the live, but she's going to get the replay. Have a great chat, folks.
It'll be great to see you in the replay, Kay.
Absolutely. Well, welcome, folks, to Future Fiction Reviews and another episode of the Creators Collective. And today I am very honoured to be joined by two giants of the YouTube booktube world. They're going to shake their heads going, what? But these two, I've admired these two work for a very long time now. So I'm very honored to have them both on the channel today. I'm going to do my best. As you can see, I am the Fireballs referee, and I'm going to do my best to prevent all-out war. But we have Dr. Philip Chase and AP Canavan, also known as the Critical Dragon. Welcome to the channel, guys.
Well, thank you very much for inviting us. Just as a warning to everyone, I have a very bad head cold and migraines, so I'm not exactly at my best today.
Yeah. Which is why I promise to be slightly less annoying to my nemesis, whom I even refrain from calling you Professor Fireballs.
Well, Philip, I am convinced it's because you've been sending me those packages full of colds and sneezes, and you just send them to me to try and make me sick because you're evil.
It's the new anthrax letterbox thing, isn't it? He's posting cold viruses through to you.
I think dragons are immune to viruses, but anyway. You look great, AP. Though, despite the migraine and the cold, you look great. Right now, you're glowing, actually, like the ghost of Obi-Wan or something. It looks good.
Well, that's because I'm lit by the ethereal light of goodness, as opposed to the deep dark shadows that you usually lie in.
Oh dear. Well, I mean, let's get the elephant out of the room first. Who is whose nemesis? Because you argue about this all the time.
He's the nemesis. He's the evil one.
No, it actually says it in a book that he's the nemesis. So if it says it in a book, it has to be true, right?
If it's citation needed.
Citation required. Brilliant stuff. So I'd like to kick things off on the Creator Collective and ask each of you what is it about science fiction and fantasy that you kind of love so much? Why you read it? Why is this genre kind of special to you? Why does it talk to you? And what do you get out of it personally?
Yeah. Oh no. After you, Obi-Wan.
Well, from an early age, I enjoyed reading science fiction. I enjoyed reading fantasy. I read like my dad's legal thrillers and the spy novels, and I would read everything. But I had a special affinity for fantasy because, unlike a lot of the other fiction, even other genre fiction, fantasy was that one step removed from a direct commentary on our world. And so it allowed the exploration of very similar, very human concepts, but it took me out of the reality that I was living in, still connected to it, still dealing with these things. But it was that one step removed that allowed for, and I hesitate to use this word, a more sort of objective look at the assumptions we make, the implicit biases that we have, how we would deal with different situations. And it presented a world that was connected to ours, but because it was slightly different, it caused us to ask questions about our behavior and our assumptions about how things should function. So there was that aspect of it. And of course, connected to that was, there was an element of excitement and story and something that was just grander. And for a lot of fantasy, there is a focus on how the actions of individuals can build toward doing something good. That it emphasized the need for the individual to take responsibility, and an individual can make a difference no matter how powerless you feel or how small you feel. And given where I grew up and when I grew up, that was an important affirmation for me, because it wasn't the easiest time to be around. And so having that confirmation that an individual can make a difference, an individual can strive and improve the world around them, that was important to me. So that started my love of fantasy.
Yeah, that's beautifully said. And yeah, I can imagine that growing up in Northern Ireland was having that, not just escape, because it sounds like it also helped you to wrestle with, when you come back to the world that you live in. It's so, when people say escape, I think they often say it pejoratively, but really, I think, as Tolkien pointed out in his essay on fairy stories, that escape, you have to ask, well, escape from what? And then, of course, what does that escape allow you to do? And it helps you process your own struggles in a way that I think is really important, which is why fantasy's been around for a very long time. It's the oldest kind of storytelling, really, when you think about it. I mean, there are fantastical elements to Gilgamesh and to the oldest stories that we know of, all the myths and everything else. And so why have we needed this form of not just escape, but also projecting our own struggles onto perhaps a larger canvas? And I believe that, it is often today not as appreciated as it probably ought to be. That there is a tendency for some people to dismiss genre fiction, to look down on it's not realism, it's not literary or whatever. But I actually think that fantasy as a genre has some really wonderful advantages, in that it is a genre that most encourages the freeing of the imagination. And it allows us to just go for it. And in these imagined worlds, in this otherworldly climates, and in these strange and weird places, we encounter ourselves. It's as if fantasy performs in some ways the same function as dreams. Who here doesn't have weird dreams, right? Why do we have such strange, disturbing, weird dreams? And I think fantasy is, in a sense, a form of conscious dreaming, where we are dealing with things on a level that is archetypal in some way, that is universal. But we come back from that experience feeling empowered, as AP said, feeling a sense of meaning and purpose in a world where we often get the message that there is no inherent or intrinsic meaning to life. But fantasy is a genre that often allows us to feel that sense of meaning, to forge it, to carve it from existence as we participate in that journey, and we experience those triumphs and those sorrows vicariously with the characters. So for me, fantasy is the ultimate literature. It is the literature that most frees the imagination. And we are creatures of imagination. We are the storytelling creature. So I think of fantasy is just fantastic. It is the genre that I fell in love with as a kid, that made me a reader, that made me love stories. And, not that I like other genres too, but fantasy for me is very special that way.
But Philip, you had mentioned Tolkien's essay, but and one of the things that we talked about previously was Stephen R. Donaldson talking about what we take back from that journey.
Yeah.
And when we think about how Donaldson used the Chronicles of Thomas Covenant as a projection and almost literalization of the struggle of the psyche, and gave it the room to walk around so that we could visualize and empathize, instead of struggling to understand the internal machinations of our minds and our conscience and our consciousness, externalizing that, literalizing it as a metaphor, or literalizing that metaphor, gives us a way to explore and understand. And then we take that back with us when we re-enter this reality to think about what we have learned. And instead of making those base assumptions, we've experienced a different way of approaching problems. And, that for me is one of the great strengths of literature in general. But quite often my dissatisfaction is probably too strong a term. But with a lot of literary fiction, it is so fixated on the here and now, on a very particular moment in a particular culture, exploring a particular life, that while that can be revelatory, there is so much about it that is so specific to that moment in time that I can't have that same abstract notion and conceptualization of the bigger aspects of humanity that connect us. So it's that tension between the two things, I think, is something that really makes fantasy stand out for me.
It's really interesting what you said, Philip, about like comparing fantasy to dreams, because I mean, there's many academics that have said that dreams are a way of our subconscious kind of sorting out and reordering events that we have experienced throughout the day or the week or whatever. And in another way, fantasy, as you guys have said, is a way of kind of removing ourselves from the context of our world and maybe having our own problems or our own feelings reflected back to us, and then using that as a way of helping us to find solutions for those emotional problems or psychological problems.
Yeah,
which I find really interesting.
Indeed, yeah, and I mean, this is not my original idea or anything. I've come across many people who've expressed the notion that myths are our collective dreams, and dreams are our private myths. And fantasy, for me, fits within that construct beautifully. In a sense, it straddles dreams and myths in a sense, doesn't it? It seems to take inspiration from dreams and myths, which all come from a common source, I think. Fantasy just freely engages in a way that I love, with that level of the unconscious and plugging into things that are just universal, things that we seem to need to deal with, and in a way that, again, is empowering and confers a sense of purpose and meaning. And that's just so important in our world, to have that and to get through life. It's just so important. And the other aspect of that is that, yes, the fantasy is not as communal as the myths from older cultures have been. They're not exactly the same in the sense that this is an individual's dream that is that rubs alongside myths in many ways. But at the same time, we come together in forums like this, on platforms like this, and we discuss these stories in a way that is communal too. And that's another aspect of this that I love, that I always come away from discussions about particular series like that, had fantastic discussions, despite the fact that he's my nemesis, with AP about Malazan, and we're going through the Wars of Light and Shadow. And I come away from every one of those discussions feeling enlightened and feeling a sense of clarity. And it's just wonderful. It's something that goes beyond the experience of the story, where someone else's experience of the story, I can connect with that, and that informs me. And I find that also just such a wonderful thing to have that experience. I sometimes even enjoy the discussions even more than the book, even. That happens sometimes. But they complement each other beautifully, these discussions, and the idea that we can be, even though we think of reading as a very private exercise, and it is in many respects, but the fact that we have communities like this, where we can read great stories, like Speak of the Devil, there's Janny Wirtz. I mean, we can come together and discuss the Wars of Light and Shadow, and I can learn from AP's perspective or Joanna's perspective or whoever, and I can watch other people having these discussions, and the ideas are firing, and I'm getting these, it's almost as if these reverberations of these archetypes and myths and things that I I need to engage with in order to feel that sense of meaning. So yeah, I love that aspect of it as well.
And I think like one of the strengths of fantasy is that symbolism and metaphor are built into the very tapestry of the narrative.
Yeah.
That as a simple illustration, you can read Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, and you go, "Oh, in fair Verona do we lay our sea?" You know, oh, so this is a story about Verona. But we know as soon as we take that slight step back and we think about it in more abstract terms, that it's not just about two warring families; it's about split factions, and it's about youth and the innocence of youth, but also the recklessness of youth, and then how it could be political, it could be cultural, it could be sociological or economic, how these ways of dividing us into factions can cause negative impacts on the people, the individuals that we care and we love about. And so as soon as we can look at it very, very literally, this is what happened, this is the story. And then we think about it as a metaphor, as a symbol, as a way of exploring concepts. And I think fantasy leans into that and embraces it in a way that other genres don't necessarily do to the same extent. Horror maybe quite often does this, but with a very particular focus. Mm. And so when we consider, like even when you think about how you approach what a text is, what the narrative is, you have three major sort of points on a triangle, because you have the text as a physical object, and that is it was created at a certain time by a certain person in a certain place. And so there's this whole sort of aspect of the text as a material object that was created. And then we can think of the text as its content, where we would do close readings about all the different specific words that are used, but outside of its context, outside of its relationship to other things in the genre. And then the third point that is involved in deriving meaning is the position of the reader, because every reader is individual and every reader brings part of themselves to it. And so when we try and find out what a text means, we're constantly negotiating these points, when and where and who created it, because that will have an impact, because we're all part and parcel of a time, culture, social space, however you want to describe it, with all of the inherent things and assumptions that we make about the world. And then we have the actual words on the page, what happens, who the characters are. These are all aspects. But then as soon as we involve the individual reader, that reader is going to bring aspects of their own life to their understanding of the text. And so you have this wonderful and extraordinarily complicated web of understanding of what narrative is and functions. And that's why I think fantasy really leans into embracing that.
Yeah, I mean, you guys talked a lot about this on your How to Analyze Stories collab series that you did, which I thoroughly enjoyed, and it's honestly enriched my personal reading experience, but it's also allowed me to look at stories from different points of view for when I review a book. You know, you talk about narrative, you talk about breaking down context and character. What was kind of like what was the initial idea for both of you to do that? Was it for your own benefit to kind of just sort out for yourselves breaking down a story like that, or you know, but also at the same time you wanted to kind of just give people a different perspective on how to kind of look at stories and books?
Philip made me do it.
I actually, the whole thing was just my plan. It was just my plan to annoy AP. That's it. It was an opportunity several weeks in a row to meet with him and make fun of him. And no, I mean, to tell you the truth, Luke, actually that series is very much a reflection of what we do in the classroom. We teach students how to analyze stories. And what I have seen again and again and again over my 30 years now of teaching is that anybody who wants to analyze a story can do it. Anybody. I've had students who come into my introduction to literature course very much hostile, very much feeling like they're hostages in there because they're obligated to. That's true. That's why he's got my background.
Yeah. He's in the same house.
But anyway, yes, I mean, these students often, some of them are excited to learn. They're fans of literature already. Some of them even write their own poetry. Some of them are, easy to teach. They're fun to teach because they want to learn. The challenge for an educator would be the students who don't want to learn. And when you're in a required lower level course, you do get a few of those. In fact, I would say maybe the majority of your students are going to be not exactly thrilled about being there. Oh no. There's a whole history behind that comment. But yeah, the fact is, sometimes when you have these students in a course like this, and I take it as my calling in life, let's say, to try to reach those students, the ones who are not necessarily thrilled about being there, who don't like reading. Nothing makes me happier than when a student who has gone through my course says to me near the end of the semester, or even afterwards, comes and visits me. Even sometimes I've had students come back and visit me 5-10 years later, and they'll say, I used to hate stories. I used to hate reading literature. I hated English class. But that semester something happened, and I really love, and I continue to read. And, that makes me so happy to hear. And the fact is, they have learned about not just we make it sound very important and scholarly and all that. Stories speak to our hearts. They help us get through life. They give us a sense of catharsis. They, as we were just saying, they can confer meaning on us and give us clarity to process our experiences. And I have had a lot of students who have said to me, I've even had a student, sometimes will say something like, I remember a particular student probably 20 years ago, very bright student, didn't talk a lot in class, but very bright, wrote very well. And at the end of the semester, after it was all over, came back to talk to me and said, I just want you to know that I was having a very hard time this semester. My boyfriend, long-term boyfriend, is dying of cancer. And I just want you to know that reading a lot of these stories and poems and such has really helped me to struggle through this time. And I had no idea that was going on. But the fact of the matter is, that's why we do this. Our passion for stories and for fantasy in particular comes from the fact that we know the magic that they can do for those who engage with them and who are willing to go on those journeys. And that to me is just so important and so special and so intrinsic to what we are. But yeah, I even forgot what you asked me, but I hope I answered the question.
To build on what Philip was just saying there, because he started out with what I thought was a really important point, which is everyone can do this.
Yeah.
And the thing is, everyone does do this. Part of what we tried to do was to explain concepts and terminology that allowed people to do it more consciously rather than unconsciously.
Yeah.
Because when you read a story, when you watch a film, when you watch a TV show, you react, oh, that's the bad guy. You're like, how did you know that? Oh, well, I just knew. But if you understand the techniques, if you understand the terminology, you can actually work it out. You can find out how you were manipulated, would be the pejorative way, but influenced into that position. And we see this in marketing, in advertising, in branding, like all of these different aspects of the business world, because narrative and storytelling is a form of communication, and our world functions on communication. But as a really basic illustration of this, there was a song, Cake by the Ocean. And this song is very clearly not about eating baked goods while sitting on the sand next to a large body of salty water. You go, well, how did you know that? well, it's obvious. Why is it obvious? And we start breaking down the symbols, the metaphors. We go, so when we hear that song, when we read those lyrics, we are understanding it in terms of they may be saying one thing, but they are meaning another thing. And then if we compare that to Marvell's To His Coy Mistress, a poem from hundreds of years ago, and you go, some startling similarities, because this is what humans do. We use art and storytelling to woo others, to impress others, to persuade others. And I had a lot of fun in class one time going through a compare and contrast of Cake by the Ocean and Marvell's To His Coy Mistress, to point out the differences and how we can actually understand the speaker's motivations and the speaker's intention, and how it is all put together and why we feel those things and how the imagery is used. And the thing is, my students all automatically, when they see this stuff, they go, oh, it's that. They know how to do it.
Yeah.
But they don't necessarily have the vocabulary to break it all down. And when you have a lot of those terms, it helps with that conscious thought of explaining the links between I see the thing and this is the conclusion. It helps you with the working out. And this is so imperative for our understanding of story, because story, narrative, is incredibly complex. And there has been a movement toward a sort of consumer individualistic expectation about it of, I didn't enjoy this, therefore the thing is bad. And it sort of short circuits any evaluation of the actual thing because it's focused solely on the self. And I feel personally that we actually learn more, not only about ourselves, but about narrative and story, when we can understand why we don't respond to things a certain way or why we do respond to things a certain way. If we understand that, if we can articulate that, then we can communicate that more effectively to other readers. And it's not just, oh, well, if you like The Wheel of Time, then you will like Stephen Erickson's Malazan Book of the Fallen, because they're both big fantasy series. Like, they are so wildly different. It could be that you do enjoy them, but just the mere fact that they are both big fantasy series isn't the determining factor. And I think that's part of the problem that we have when we don't understand the thing that we're trying to articulate. Because it's not about saying that those feelings are wrong, but they are rooted entirely in the self. They're rooted entirely in our individual appreciation.
Right.
But if we're trying to articulate that to someone else, then having these terms, having these concepts, being able to explain how and why, to understand the context of something, the techniques, that allows us to be more articulate, and it allows us to understand our own preferences better, why we responded to certain texts a certain way, and to be able to communicate that to other people. And when you think of social media, news sources online, and all of it, being able to critically think about how and why we are being manipulated, how and why the writer of whatever news story or editorial or anything on social media, if we understand those techniques, it doesn't make us immune, but it helps us understand why things have a certain impact on us.
Yeah. To be clear, now, we are not saying there's anything wrong with seeking entertainment and with saying, hey, I love this book. This is just fun. That is wonderful. Being entertained, enjoyment is a really important factor in one's reading experiences. All we're saying is, if you want to add to that, if you want to add layers of critical thinking and be able to articulate why you enjoy, and be able to dig into that a little bit more, we're offering these tools. And again, anybody who wants to can use these tools. And we think enrich your understanding, and not only of the stories, but as AP said, of yourself and why you respond to some and maybe not so much to others. But yeah, that was our kind of mission really behind doing that. And we hope that it has, as you said, Luke, maybe it's helped some people to appreciate their engagement with the stories that they are reading even more. And that's a win, I think, if we can help people to appreciate and enjoy and love not only the stories as they're in them, but the act of thinking about them afterwards. Because really, that's the big secret, Luke, to what AP and I do for a living, is that the main thing we really try to encourage people to do is critical thinking. That is at the heart of the humanities. That is at the heart. That's our wheelhouse. That's what we do. So when we're teaching people to, for example, write a research paper, right? The heart of that is critical thinking, analyzing which sources are appropriate and how you can fit them into your own analysis in order to enhance your analysis, and articulating how what a theme of the story might be, and what elements of the story, such as the characters and the setting and the symbols and the title of the story and the narrative perspective, how those elements contribute to that theme. It's all critical thinking, and it goes beyond the immediate exercise, and it spills over into your life, because critical thinking is something that you can do in any realm. So that is really the heart of what we do. And I guess if we have a gospel, a thing that we're trying to spread around the world, it is critical thinking, at least in my mind.
Yeah. Johnny Wirtz just said the literal interpretation expanded by layers of abstraction where the reader's viewpoint colors the bias, story creates blending of perception.
Yeah.
As always, she has a way with words, does Johnny?
Oh, she does.
Yeah. I mean, I've, over the past 4 years, I've been doing an Open University science course. So critical thinking is something that I've been like exploring and using and trying to kind of understand more and more. I mean, do you think critical thinking, just in general, do you think critical thinking is a kind of dying way? I mean, I hate to be.
You're being very polite.
Very polite. But like, do you think online discourse has prevented or stopped people from stepping back and being critical about whatever they're talking about?
Well, I will say, and then I'll hand it over to AP. I just read a study. This is a scientific, thorough study. I can't remember who conducted it. I actually sent it to AP even, because we before we started recording, or before we went live.
If I can find it while you're talking.
Okay, cool. Before we went live, we were just talking about AI and how AP and I, as educators, are struggling with a flood of AI essays, AI-generated essays, as educators are everywhere. It used to be that, of course, people used to plagiarize, but nowadays AI has been making it easier and to cheat, essentially, and we are in the midst of a bit of a moment here in education, I think, because of AI. But the study that I'm getting around to here essentially found a negative correlation between the ability to think critically and the frequency of one's usage of AI tools. In other words, the more you lean on AI tools, the less you are able to think critically. And they found a negative correlation, meaning the one activity is bad for the other, right? So that's pretty alarming, I think. And I do actually believe that we are seeing it in our classrooms. And this is, by the way, particularly true for young people. So if you're growing up leaning on using AI tools as a crutch all the time, you are actually inhibiting your own ability to think through things. And that to me is alarming. And I think we have a lot of people have just rushed into the AI world like, yay, this is the best thing ever. And as a creative person, I have a very strong emotional reaction against the use of AI in creative realms. I already have that bias. I am very opposed to AI art replacing human art. I'm very opposed to AI writing replacing human writing. I think we're throwing out something really vital to our humanity if we're allowing AI to do our creative stuff for us. I'm just find that to be beyond alarming. I think that would be the worst thing that could happen to us, actually, because we've just been talking about how we need stories and we need to people to create stories, right? We can't have robots creating our stories for us. That we're not going to get what we want, what we need to from those stories. So I think that it's a big challenge that we are encountering right now. And for me, there's an absolute clear answer to your question that AI and and by the way, of course, AI can be useful. Of course, AI has helped in a lot of realms. Of course, it is helping us to make all kinds of breakthroughs and discoveries and whatnot. And it may even help us with vital problems like climate change. Who knows? But that said, I think we should be wise about how we employ this tool, because like any other tool, it can be used well and it can be abused. And right now, I think we're seeing a lot of abuse of AI. And unfortunately, it is showing in our classrooms. So I want to hear what AP has to say about it, because he always has something cool to say.
Well, I found the article and I just typed it in the sort of the little private chat thing.
Okay,
so that's the article that you're talking about. So Luke, if you have the ability to cut and paste, you could put that in the main chat. But the AI is one part of it. The other part is, if you think of the movement that we have had from private discourse into social media and discourse online, and one of there are a couple of different issues that all add to this. One is immediacy. Someone says something and you immediately type. It's about moving on as quickly as possible. And we know that when we are typing, our body language isn't apparent, our accent, the sound of our voice, all of these sorts of things. That's why rhetoric and written communication are studied, because there are techniques that you can use. But with social media, quite often it's about the immediate thing that you say. But because people can't read tone in something like that, that quite often it then leads to a short, abrupt exchange in which it's about my position is right, your position is wrong, which isn't encouraging discussion. It's encouraging an individualistic, I'm right and you're wrong. Added to that, a lot of these issues are complex, and short statements about something almost invariably cannot communicate the nuance of specific situations, particularly when we talk about politics or culture or society, that there are hugely complex issues, but we try to be reductive and have the clickbait title, and here is the position that you should have. We've reduced everything to bumper stickers. So instead of reading a long political treatise on something, it's like, oh, well, here's the 15-second soundbite. And everything is shortened and curtailed and reduced and overly simplified until it becomes simplistic rather than a distillation of the complex idea. It is actually simplistic. It is overly reductive. And social media has exacerbated that. Like that has been part and parcel of rhetoric. If you think of the great Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s speech, I have a dream. Everyone remembers I have a dream. That rhetorical technique of the repetition of that phrase is powerful. It embeds itself in your mind. But we don't reduce the whole speech to just that. And yet, quite often, that's what people do. They just take a short snippet now. So think of the number of times that someone will have, a famous quotation from someone, and it's like the little bumper sticker version of someone's entire philosophy has been reduced to this one tiny aphorism. And it's, well, that's my position. Or in any sort of discussion, it's, well, this is the position you must have. And you go, well, it's more complicated than that. Human life is more complicated than that. No, it isn't. This is the right way to be. And because of that, we have a reduction in attention span. We have a reduction in tolerance and nuance and understanding and an attempt to understand. And this is accelerated even more by the anonymity that is provided via social media interaction. That you can set up an avatar, you can set up an account that isn't linked to who you are, and you will write whatever you want because there's no comeback on you. That you will write things and say things that you would never dream of saying to that person's face if they were in front of you. And you go, well, why would that be? Why? Because we can be emboldened by the fact that, oh, we can say whatever we want. And yet, when you're speaking to someone, they're not forcing you to say something different. You can express the same points, but you think of them as a human. You think of them as another person. But online, and a lot of online discourse, we're not thinking of the other person as a person. It's a screen name. And all we're doing is we're just yelling back at someone. And I'm just as guilty of this as anyone else, because I can have a bad day and I can look at something and type without thinking. And in combination with that sort of individualistic, anonymous curtailment and the immediacy of commenting on things and making sure that you are in public saying the right thing, there's a performative aspect to it. That in combination with AI, where AI, particularly in how a number of students are using it, where AI is doing the thinking for them. And you're like, no, but the whole point is a tool should help us evolve, should help us grow. It shouldn't be taking away from our abilities and skills, because that's not a tool anymore. That's keeping us down. That's a detriment to who we are. And when we think about the large language models, particularly as students using them to write essays, for example, people say, "Oh, but that's what the businesses use them for. They need to be trained in how to do this." Well, okay, you need to write a better prompt. How do you write a better prompt? You need to understand tone and audience and intent and purpose. You need to understand what exactly it is that you're trying to say, why you're trying to say it, and to whom you're trying to say it. So you need to understand all of the basic concepts of rhetoric. And then once you've designed your prompt, because remember, how we write prompts is going to change as each iteration of AI comes out and people have different GUIs, different interfaces. So it's not that we can teach how to prompt, but we can teach the basic concepts that will lead to good prompt results. And then once it has produced something, you need to be able to go through that and see what assumptions it's making, whether it's in depth. You need to be able to analyze that text. And you can't use the AI to analyze the AI output. It doesn't work. So the human involved, and all of these AI companies say this, you must have the human involved. And yet, because it is so easy to type in a prompt, get it to generate the thing, and go, there we go. I went, oh, let me go to this website where I can humanize my writing, so that my professor doesn't know that I used an AI. It's like, great, but I teach you. I know that you don't know what half of these words mean, and this is actually a very superficial analysis, and this doesn't make any sense, and you ignored a whole bunch of rules that were set in place because you didn't put those into the prompt. And then you didn't read over the essay. And even if you read over the essay, the whole point of this class was to teach you how to analyze it, how to understand it, how to write it better. Because if you want to decide, I'm going to use AI in marketing, you need to know all of the key skills of how marketing works in order to evaluate if what the AI is producing is any good. And if you have gone through your marketing degree getting an AI to do all of the work,
oh my goodness,
you haven't learned that.
Yeah, I mean it's the same in art as you mentioned earlier, Philip. I mean my other half, she's a freelance artist and designer. One of my best friends has a design company, and they are looking at this looming horizon where they're not going to be needed anymore. They're going to be out of business because people are using generated images, because it's either cheaper or free, and it's just it happens like that. And it's just so it's so depressing to think that everything that we put into imagination, either writing or creating art, is dying just because of a lack of effort on the behalf of the other people.
Yep.
It's a sad thing. It really is.
Yep, I do think.
Sorry, excuse me for just a minute. I'll be right.
Yeah,
that's fine. While he's not here, it would be remiss for me to not congratulate you on your Broken Binding Special Edition.
Oh wait, you should do it while he's here. Actually,
yeah, I should probably. Yeah, I should
even
probably.
better. No, you know what? Thank you so much, Luke. And I won't embarrass him because he's not here. But AP is a big reason why this is even here, because he is he's my nemesis, but he is a developmental editor. And a brilliant one at that. And he really, one of the smarter things I've done, there's a short list of smart things I've done in my life, but one of them was engaging AP as a developmental editor. But I couldn't be happier about this edition, really. And speaking of working with great people, I mean, so many people contributed to this beauty. Obviously, the Broken Binding, Matt and his whole crew there. These are people who are passionate about stories and about beautiful books, and making beautiful books a bit more accessible than perhaps they might otherwise be. That's part of the vision. But yeah, then of course the artists, Renee Agner and Peng Lu and Jack Shepard, who made the map and did the cover design for my original books. So many great creative. Mark Lawrence wrote a glorious foreword for it.
Oh, wow.
Just couldn't be happier, really. And so it's really something that, yes, it is the sort of the fruit of my 2 decades of labor in a sense, but it could never have existed without a bunch of lovely people, even the nemesis. So, yeah.
Oh, brilliant. So I'm going to be starting the behemoth that is Malazan this summer. I'm stepping into the dark side. Any preparations? I mean, you guys have analyzed this to death, in over the couple of years of YouTube. Any preparation? Any tips that you can kind of offer me so that I'm not terrified going into this vastly complex?
Yeah, just read it one word at a time.
This is a bizarre thing. This is something that I genuinely do not understand. People going, oh, well, it's so intimidating. Like, it's a book. It's the same as any other book. Yeah. But it's I'm really worried about it. Like, why are you worried about it? It's a book. You read books. And that's all that this is. This is the same as reading any other book. And it's never about, oh, am I smart enough? Am I not smart enough? Or is it too difficult? It's all of this stuff is conditional on the individual reader.
Yeah.
Like, we know in the, basically, if we think about in Western civilization, broadly defined, there's been a decrease in adult literacy. But book readers are usually at the top end of it anyway, because they read for fun. They read for enjoyment. But we've seen, particularly with a number of adult fantasy, being written at a lower literacy level, because that expands the potential audience and market for it, which is a perfectly normal and natural and perfectly fine way to go about it if that's what you're trying to do. But the assumption that this book should entertain me and this is what I want, and only if it does that is it good, that assumption can ruin not just Malazan, but any book that you read, because it wasn't written individually for you, for me, for any of us. It was written as an expression of something. And if it doesn't resonate with us personally, well, okay, we move on to the next one. If it resonates with us, that is the joy of great literature. We find the things that speak to us. And the Malazan Book of the Fallen, the novels of the Malazan Empire, they are a type of fantasy writing and narrative that I greatly enjoy and appreciate, because they are doing the things with fantasy that I love. Does that mean that they are better than other fantasy writing? Not necessarily, because if I was looking for a fun, quick, entertaining read, they would be terrible books, because that's not what they're trying to do.
Right.
If I was looking for deep, introspective musings about life and reality, I'm not really going to go to David Gemmell. But if I want a rip-roaring adventure fantasy that follows a particular formula, David Gemmell was great, because that's the type of book it was. Literature isn't any one thing. Even within a genre, it isn't any one thing. And the best advice about reading is read it. Try and understand it. If that's what you're interested in, or if you're struggling with it, don't immediately think it's either badly written or I'm too dumb. Because quite often it's about how we've approached it. If we think that, oh, well, in a fantasy book, it should or must follow Freytag's pyramid. You're like, why? Why should fantasy or any form of literature follow the outline of a 19th century Bildungsroman? Like, that's what Freytag's pyramid is. Oh, because that's how a story is written. That's how one form of story is written, not all stories. And if it doesn't conform to that, instead of reading against it saying it should be doing this, you go, well, what is it doing? And I think the best guidance for reading is try to engage with the text in front of you, regardless of what it is, on its terms.
Yeah.
On what it is trying to show you. That doesn't necessarily mean it's going to succeed. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be good or entertaining. But if we try to engage with what it is trying to accomplish, what the author of it was trying to communicate, we get a better understanding and appreciation of the thing. And even if the book doesn't turn out to be one of our favorites, it's time well spent. But if we read against it, if we get frustrated because it's not doing the thing we want it to do, and we insist that our wants, our desires are the things that should dictate the story, we're missing out on what literature has to offer us.
Yeah.
And it becomes a frustrating experience. It becomes one where we can't grasp the cool things that occur in the narrative because we're so focused on, but I wanted this thing, or they should have done this better. And we keep second guessing it instead of engaging with it.
Yeah, I could not agree more. One of the most puzzling reactions that I encounter, for me anyway, but you hear it a lot when people are evaluating or reacting to books, is this book just wasn't what I wanted it to be. 2 stars. Okay, wait a minute here. What you mean? The author didn't text you and ask what you wanted before writing the book? What's wrong with them? I find that you're more likely to get something from any book if you're trying to figure out what it's trying to be, rather than insisting that it should be what you want, right? And you might actually find yourself expanding that way, growing that way and this is definitely true for me. When my experience with Malazan, I loved it the first time I read it. I absolutely loved it. But I knew there was a lot about it that was challenging me and that I didn't get, that I didn't grasp easily. And it's because it was doing things that I didn't expect. It was doing things that, are actually common enough in fiction in general, but not quite so common in fantasy. It was subverting tropes. It was doing things differently. Like, for example, the most common example here is there's no one hero or even group of protagonists that you follow along with for the entirety of the series. It goes in a lot of different places. There are a lot of different theaters, and there are convergences. These things come together in a way that's deeply satisfying. But you're still left with this sense that who am I rooting for here? For me, at the end of the day, what I realized is that Malazan was giving me a much truer view of the individual's place in the universe. And I ended up valuing that perspective because I got uncomfortable for a while, insisting, wait, where's my hero? You know, why can I not just follow along with this person? And I gradually realized, wait, that's not what Steven Erikson is doing. And once I grasped that and I appreciated that, it became such a much more rich experience. And the second time, of course, I read it, and I had some help from this guy. You know, it was a life-changing experience. It was the most impactful and wonderful literary journey of my life. And you know, but it took some time. That's why I started with, you read it one word at a time. You know, it's like with any large endeavor, you don't do the whole thing at once. And I think maybe that's why it's intimidating sometimes, is that we think, oh, how am I going to read all these 10 really big books? And, you know, and they're very challenging and but you're reading it one word at a time, like with any endeavor, you know, as the Welsh say, it's steady tapping that breaks the stone, right? So one little tap at a time, and you'll get there. And where you get is going to, you know, it'll depend on your particular journey, but I hope that it'll be a beautiful one for you, Luke.
Yeah. And one of the things to remember, like, people sometimes forget, they go, oh, you have to read it in this order, and you have to read one after the other because it's the only way that you're going to remember everything. Right. But back when the books were coming out, they weren't coming out like within weeks of each other. It was one a year, and in between each of them, you read other books. You read tens, hundreds of other books in between each of these things. And when you came back in, you started again. But I think something that is actually a change in how we approach books, particularly in the fantasy field, is this need to master the material.
Oh, yeah.
So why isn't the magic explained early on? Why aren't the rules made clear about this? Why am I not told what is going to happen, and then I'm just going to follow along with it? Almost
Where's
like
the silver platter.
it's almost like they're asking for the essay thesis statement of the novel at the beginning, because it's not about the exploration of the things anymore and the wonder of it. It's like, no, I want this to do these things, and I need to be comfortable with it. And we are actually very uncomfortable with being uncomfortable, that we are looking for reading to become more and more conciliatory, to be more comforting. And, you know, there's a good reason for that. The greater the stresses and pressures in the real world, the more that something that is comfortable and supportive and easy can be relaxing. And then when we are very comfortable and we're in this whole position, we want things that maybe can stretch us or push us in different directions. But the expectation that I see Johnny's just mentioned the point I was about to go into, which is that a series has to be done and completed because it has to be exactly the thing. You know, in which case, if someone is publishing books and you don't buy them, why are they going to keep writing that series?
Yeah.
They're not selling because everyone's going, no, I'm just going to wait until it's all done. That we're no longer comfortable with, well, I'm going to read this and then there'll be another book along. Because there is the joy in the act of reading and experiencing as we go along. There's the joy in exploring these stories. But everything now is about consumption of a complete narrative unit, and that it has to be homogenized and palatable and easily understood, because anything that stretches us, well, you're just not being accessible enough. You go back 60 years. And if you think of all of the knowledge or something that could be in novels, but the barrier to entry was that you had to be able to read at that level. And now, and it's wonderful in so many respects, but because of audiobooks, there is no barrier to entry anymore, because our understanding of the language as it is spoken is usually much better than our understanding of the written language. And so what used to be the province of, a different style for adults is now, well, I have to cater to people who are listening to the audiobook. And that affects the structure, it affects the diction, it affects the different events and how characters, how much telling you do versus how much showing, and all of those different phrases that you've heard. But the idea that it must cater to every single circumstance. And this, again, gets projected onto the text as it must do these things instead of, well, let's see what this one is doing. Let's engage with what's on the page in front of us. Let's enjoy what is there instead of saying it must do these things, because then it's just conforming to opinions. Then we're going to end up ossifying and strangling the very genre and creativity that we love, because we're insisting on it must follow this pattern. And patterns are predictable and wonderful, and we love them. But we also want things that are doing something different. And that's the joy of reading. It's not just about reading the same story over and over again. We can do that. We can enjoy that. But we also sometimes want other things. And we are not the only individual reader in the world. There's a whole host of people with different wants and needs and desires. And okay, so that book mightn't work for us personally. Doesn't mean it's a bad book, because it might really speak to the next person. So yeah,
it's interesting because, like, if you think back to like when the Wheel of Time was being published or Game of Thrones, there was like 2, 3, sometimes even 4 years between books. And there seems to be like an immediacy culture now where it's, if we haven't got that book by the next year, I'm not going to read this series anymore. There's that kind of, and that kind of correlates kind of back to what you were talking about, AP, earlier, when we were talking about AI, about this kind of loss of attention span. It kind of, you can kind of put it into this grander scale where this immediacy of needing something immediately, otherwise they're not going to bother with it anymore.
Yeah. And, or you could be an idiot like me and take 2 decades to write a trilogy and then publish them all in the same year.
Yeah, which is what Tori just said. Yeah. Hi, Tori, by the way. Tori's just popped in.
Hi, Tori. Yeah, no, it's which, by the way, I don't necessarily recommend publishing all 3. But that's what I did. And they're all out there. It's a complete series. So, yeah.
But there has been a shift toward a more consumer mindset. So instead of readers, we have become consumers of narrative. And narrative is there to be consumed. That
entertain me, the attitude, is just entertain me,
and as Johnny puts it, too much to read. You're like, but one of the things that it's something that's said often about, particularly about epic fantasy stories. It's this book was too long, or it could have been shorter, and you're like, yeah, it could have been shorter, but then it wouldn't be that book. And we can say that, okay, in this section, I lost interest. And it's a way of trying to be slightly more specific about it. Because I hate it. It could have been shorter, or it needed an editor. When you say something needs an editor, you are insulting the people who edited the piece of work. And remember, an editor doesn't get final say. The author always gets final say. Right. And an editor could go through, highlight a whole section. Isn't that right, Philip? An editor could go through and highlight
all the bad parts in the Adan trilogy. I mean, no, actually, a lot of the great parts, a lot of the really cool parts, I have to admit. But yes, you're right, AP. You can, the author will sometimes say to the feedback from an editor, oh, wow, I'm so glad that you pointed that out, because that was a huge hole here in my storytelling. Or, wow, what a cool idea. That's going to make the scene so much better. And then there are times when, as an author, you think, no, I think I want to stick to my original vision here. And authors do that. We do that. I even did it to AP a few times. So, yeah. But I'll let you finish the point.
Well, and this is the joy about editing. I can make suggestions. I can point things out. But the work is the author's work. And that author gets to decide, no, I realize that might be a potential flaw, but I'm happy with that judgment. Or I realize that you've pointed out that this sequence may be dragging on a little, but I really want this sequence here because it's important to me. That there are all sorts of reasons why authors choose to keep things in, even when an editor has said, you know, a significant proportion of your fan base is going to complain about this one thing here. And they're like, yeah, okay, I'll take that hit. An editor's job is to help an author tell their story in the best possible way, not to tell a story in what is going to sell the best. Or it's to try and help the author articulate their vision of their narrative in the best possible way. And all decisions are ultimately the author's because it is their work. Anything an editor suggests, an author can dismiss. An author can take ideas from. And frequently what I find when editing is I might highlight something and say, there's a potential issue here with X, Y, and Z. Here's a potential solution. And the thing is, the author will look at that and they'll go, oh, I'm glad you flagged that. That solution is not going to work for reasons A, B, and C.
Right.
But it has made me think of this, which will fix the problem, but also will strengthen something else because it's the author's work. They know what they are doing, or we hope they do.
Some of them do.
And an editor is there to try and help that. And so it always frustrates me when people go, oh, this needed editing. And you're like, there were at least 3 editors worked on that. What did you want them to do? Beat the author with a big stick in order to make it fit your expectations? The author said they wanted it that way. An editor cannot force the author to do anything because it's the author's work. And does that mean that sometimes books are longer? And you're like, yeah, but if I'm going to spend $20 or £20 on a book and it's 2,000 pages long, you go, that's pretty good value for money. As long as I'm reading through it and I'm being entertained, that's really good value, as opposed to spending £20 or $20 on a book that's only 150 pages long. You go, yeah, they could have made it really short, but then I've just spent more money for a much shorter book. I'm getting more bang for my buck when they have a longer book.
See, Luke, the icing on the cake here is that AP can't say a word when a book gets released that he has been an editor for, and people criticize it for, oh, this chapter was too long, and AP had actually said that to the author, but the author ignored it. He can't say publicly, I told the author that, he can't do that. So he has to, bite his tongue all the time.
Because again, the work is the author's.
Yeah.
And anything that is in that work, you go, that belongs to the author. It's never the editor. And it doesn't matter what the editor has done, because the editor is only there to support the author.
Now, as an author, though, I can say, oh, well, AP told me to do this, and I'm really glad, I had a certain character that I killed off in the first book. And AP said, you'd be better off he has more to do in the story. And it turned out to be one of the best decisions, actually, for the entire trilogy. And I'm so glad that I, in this case, listened to my editor. I can say that as an author, but he can't say, I told Philip to do this, And so.
Well, no. And again, I didn't tell you to do it.
Right.
I made an observation about something that was in the text.
Right.
I gave you my reasons for it. I explained why. But then it was up to you to decide, does that fit with your vision of the story that you wanted to tell?
Exactly. That's the same thing.
When the editor aligns with the author's intent, that's perfection. When the two views are different, it gets messier to pass. I mean, that whole he needs an editor has... Yeah. He needs an editor is something that's been flung around since Wind of Truth came out by Brandon Sanderson. It's been bandied around, but as you say, at the end of the day, it's the story that Sanderson wanted to tell.
Mm-hmm. Weirdly enough, I haven't read it yet, so I'm not 100% sure about this. But from what I've heard about it, people are highlighting certain techniques that he has used that are prevalent in all of the earlier books of that series, but maybe not to the same extent. And so, like, all of the things that I have heard that people say, oh, it's really bad, it does this thing, but that's in all of them. That's a structural thing that Sanderson includes in his writing. Or, this is in it, but that was there as well. But I think part of one of the issues is we continue to grow as readers. We are not static. And if we start reading the first book of the Stormlight Archive when we are 15, by now, we're like in our 20s, and we've read all of these other books as well. And so we're no longer in the demographic that we started with. Our experience is different and our expectations are different. And that's the thing. Do we want the books to shape or to change over time to match the readership, which is what Rowling did with Harry Potter? The early books are very much children's fiction. Then it moves into sort of the young adult and then into teen fantasy. And we have that sort of transition. And so the books kind of aged slightly with the characters and therefore the audience. But do we want that with every series? And you go, well, no, because then people will look at it and go, why is this inconsistent? Why is it changing? Why isn't it all the same? And so you cannot please everyone. And it's difficult on our journeys as readers, on the progress we make. There are certain techniques that the first time we see them are absolutely wonderful. We go, wow, that's amazing. Then the 10th time we see it, we go, yeah, whatever. Then the 100th time we see it, it's like, that's so generic. And you're like, yes, it's a trope from the genre. What's your problem with this?
Tool.
And again, there's that sort of reductionist stance of it should be doing these things. And projection of wants, needs, and desires onto a text to say it must do these things, otherwise it is bad, because that's what I personally want. We project that onto a text, we read against the text, and we're not engaging with it. Now, everyone knows I am not the world's biggest fan of Sanderson's approach to writing and what he does. But I don't rubbish his books because they are very successful generally for the audience that he is trying to reach. And he uses techniques that speak to that audience. I don't particularly enjoy them, but that's a different thing entirely. And I always try to recognize the strengths of what he does in his writing. He has very intricate surface level plotting and makes all of these amazing sort of connections between all of these different moving parts. It's very intricately and well done. But it's not the type of writing now that appeals to me. But I'm still not going to go, oh yeah, he's terrible, he can't write. Clearly he can write. But it was odd that the reaction I saw to his latest book was highlighting so many of the techniques that were in earlier Stormlight books, as well as in earlier books that he has written elsewhere. And you're like, but that's his writing. That's what he does. Right. But I think maybe it's possibly that they are more evident here, or they are less disguised here, or that readers are more experienced in picking up on them, so they notice them more. Those are all things that can impact how we perceive the writing.
And there has been some great critiques on YouTube actually about Wind and Tree. That hasn't all been like an assault on his writing, but there has been some great, really, really good discussions on with some of the bigger YouTubers, which I've really, really enjoyed. I've got one more topic to go through, if you guys are all right for time.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, which kind of links into what we've been talking about and what Tori mentioned as well earlier on, which is this book wasn't written for me and AP, and you guys caught onto that. And then especially in competition, so kind of let's talk about Spiffbo for a minute, which you've been a judge for, Philip. Like it's particularly with Spiffbo. Yes, you have to kind of be concerned, because I was a judge for 2 years with Before We Go blog. Really, really enjoyed the experience. But you do have to kind of, when you're reviewing the book, you have to kind of have a different mindset to maybe what you would if you're just reading a book normally. Because yes, you have to say whether you enjoyed it or not, but then you have to kind of think about who's this book going to work for? What's the author done well at the same time?
Yeah.
So how's that experience been for you?
Oh, it's a privilege to be a judge, and I will speak to my personal philosophy. And I know that not every judge in SPIFBO agrees with me, and that's fine. But my personal philosophy when it comes to judging, especially, but same thing really that I do when I review a book, is as much as possible, and this is something AP and I have talked about before. It is true that it is not possible to be completely objective in evaluating a book. However, that doesn't mean that this is an either or situation, that therefore we can only be entirely subjective. There are lots of middle ground positions there. There are lots of things we can talk about objectively. For example, what kind of narrator does the book have? First person? Okay, interesting. Why do you think the author chose that particular narrator? And what does it add to the story? How does that enable the author to incorporate certain themes or experiences? How does that influence our perception of the protagonist, who is the narrator? You can objectively address those things. You could talk about the characters in a way that is analytical. Are they flatter or rounder characters? Where are they on that spectrum? Do the characters experience an epiphany? Are they dynamic? Do they change in the course of the story? And if so, how and where? And what does that have to do with the theme of the story, right? These are all objective things you can talk about. So as much as I can, I try to set aside my own biases when I'm evaluating a book. As a judge, especially, I think it's important. That's my philosophy. So I try very hard not to bring those biases. So I have read, for example, romantasy books for SPIFBO, and I have made some of them semi-finalists. I have read this year's finalist from my group is it's a middle grade book. Okay, it's The Tenacious Tale of Tana the Tenor Sword. Is this my wheelhouse? No, and this is not what I read that I reach for. I'm an adult epic fantasy fan mainly, but I recognized that this book was really doing something well in what it was trying to do. And I can set aside my tastes and my biases and say, okay, well, and I also had fun reading it, by the way. But if you're an adult who embraces your inner child, you might have a great time with this too. But it's, to me, it's important to recognize the merits of the book in terms of what it is setting out to do, rather than, again, why isn't this what I want it to be, right? And that's how that's my philosophy as a judge. And when I encounter a book like The Tenacious Tale of Tana the Tenor Sword, I'm happy to recognize its merits and speak about them and pass it along as a finalist. It is a most deserving finalist, in my opinion. And it's a book that is going to delight a lot of people when they discover this. That's the whole purpose of SPFBO, is to shine a light on really well done books that are going to reach an audience. Now, maybe I'm not the target audience, the original target audience for that, but I can still recognize that it's doing something really well, can't I? I can set aside my personal biases and discuss the book on its own merits. And that's my philosophy as a judge. That's what I try to do. And yeah, you can be objective to a degree when you're doing that, and that is something that I will always assert in these discussions, because there have been people who have tried to say no, there's no objectivity whatsoever. I could not disagree more with that.
Well, there's an illustration I use to talk about this point. I think it's Wired has a whole series of videos of explaining a concept in 5 levels of difficulty. And what it is, they get an expert in something, and they have that expert explain the concept to a young child, then to a teenager, then to an undergraduate, then to a graduate, then to have a conversation with another expert. And they do this, and it shows how they can be talking about the same thing, using the same facts, using the same concepts, but they try to find a language to express it and communicate it to the audience. So when you're reading a book and it is romantasy or romantic, and it's intended for teenagers, and it's meant to have fairy tale elements, and you judge it on materialist, realist, mimetic fiction standards. You go, what are you doing? That is not what this is. Or when we look at a children's book, take the do you remember Peanuts, the cartoon and the comic strip? And the adults all went, "Meow, meow, meow, meow." And we didn't actually see the adults, we just saw the bottom half of them because everything was from the child's perspective. Or when we think of all of those adventure stories where kids go out and they save the galaxy, you're like, where are their parents? How did no one notice that they were missing? We don't apply those criteria because they are inappropriate for that narrative,
Right.
which means we're taking into consideration genre and audience and tone and approach. And we say, oh, but I want really intricate, realistic world building. Yes, like Terry Pratchett's books with the disc on the back of 4 elephants that are riding around on a giant space turtle. Yeah, that makes perfect sense in a very realist way. No, it doesn't. It's absurdist. But that's what he was trying to do. That when we read these things, again, having that reductionist mindset and trying to distill everything into what pleases me, because that is the criteria that is being applied. In almost every job that you will ever have, it's not necessarily about what pleases you personally. You can set aside personal preferences in order to evaluate something. And, we do it when we teach. Every teacher, there may be theoretically favorites in a class or certain students you have who you may not like as much. But when it comes to grading their essays, you do not take any of that into consideration ever, because it's about the work. And you go, oh, well, you can't do that when it comes to literature. Why not? We do it when teachers do it, professors do it. Yeah. Everyone does this. And yet somehow books are apparently the only exception to this rule, where you cannot have any element of objectivity, that it has to be entirely subjective about what you think. No. We evaluate things based on our knowledge and understanding, on our experiences. When people talk about things being generic, you go, how well do you know the genre? Because generic means pertaining to the genre. It is an example of something from the genre. Oh, well, this is really, really generic and boring. And you're like, I don't think that word means what you think it means. And part of the thing, and again, I am absolutely for people talking about the books that they love, getting involved in discussions about the books that they love.
Yes.
Yeah.
But one of the things I think in all of the conversations that Philip and I have ever had about this topic, we don't make judgments saying this is a good book because I like it. We try to think these are elements of it that we think are good. This is why we think they're good. This is why we think certain people will respond to them. Because it's not about just, well, I liked it, therefore it is good. And so encouraging people and sharing knowledge, expertise, different terms, different concepts, different ways of approaching it, is to try and elevate the conversation beyond me like, therefore book good. Me no like, therefore book bad. Which is reductive, and it doesn't lead to a greater understanding or even the sharing of that opinion. Unless someone has exactly the same preferences as you, how is that going to lead to a discussion or understanding of the text? And so I get frustrated because perennially this comes up about, oh, you can't be objective with a book review. You can't be objective about your perception of reality because it is shaped by your senses. So your perception of reality is not necessarily objective. It's shaped by your understanding of the world. Congratulations. Welcome to being human. But you don't have to insist that reality bend itself to your perceptions. And that's what we try to get at. That people think that these are dyadic poles, and it is either objective or subjective. And because you can never be fully objective, therefore it is all subjective. Like, yeah, but some of it is closer to rooted in the consumer ego self. And some of it is about appreciating that you're not the only person in the world. A children's story, and we can enjoy them, but you go, would a child enjoy it? Oh, look, I'm thinking about a different audience. Would this work for a child? And you do your best to understand that position. You don't insist, oh, well, this is dumb. They use really basic words. You go, it's written for 7-year-olds. What did you want them to do? The extrapolation of the diegesis into an external reality, you're like, that's not going to be appropriate for the 6-year-old.
Well, it was appropriate for a 6-year-old AP, maybe.
Yeah.
No, so it's always a balance. It's always a balance.
Yeah.
I'm glad that Tori also mentioned there that her 12-year-old son loved Tana. Yeah, I hope so too. I really do, Tori, that we'll see more middle grade fantasy writers saying, hey, okay, I'm part of this contest too, so
yeah.
Fireballs fired.
Well, one more. I do have one very short thing to add, which is if anyone has read Philip's trilogy or is going to read Philip's trilogy, the important thing to remember is all of the good bits, that's Philip. Anything that didn't work, that was my interference.
No. That is
he had something so much better, and I forced him to change it by beating him on the head.
That is so not true. But I think they all know that.
Yeah. And a lot of what you were just talking about with book reviews is also very prevalent in TV series, particularly franchises like Star Wars or The Rings of Power, which has been incredibly polarizing on social media. I mean, you guys...
Canon. They changed canon. They deviated from the text. It's not what I imagined it was going to be, therefore it is bad.
It wasn't my version of the story, therefore it's bad. Yeah.
I mean, we could look up the word adaptation in the dictionary and kind of start from there. And you say, well, it's not going to be what you wanted. It's going to be the adaptation of what that director and the writers have envisioned.
But they're writing it for this modern audience. Yeah, because if they wrote it and made the TV show for an audience in the 1960s, it would be incredibly different, you idiot. It's a TV show produced today for an audience that is alive today. That's technically the modern audience. Like, why is English so difficult for you to understand? It's not like these are complex terms.
Yeah, the thing is that when you're making an adaptation, and what I think many devoted fans, and I will give them credit for being devoted fans, and it's great that you love your series that much. I'm sensitive too about my babies. If when the Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings films came out, okay, I was a Tolkien snob. I was very wary of these films, and they do change. I don't think people appreciate how much Peter Jackson actually does change the books in his adaptation, because he has to. Because if he made a word for word, adaptation of the books, it would be the worst films. It would be terrible. He understood that. Thank goodness. And he made an adaptation, which means you have to change things. That's why we don't have the Scouring of the Shire. That's why we don't have Tom Bombadil. That's why, there's more action. It's a much more action-oriented story because it's made, as AP said, for a modern audience. And, we do lose some of the reverence that is in the original text. Does that mean that it's bad? No, it did what it was trying to do, obviously very well. It's one of the most beloved film franchises in history, and deservedly so.
Hashtag justice for Glorfindel.
Yeah, poor Glorfindel. I mean, he got cut for Arwen. Again, that's a modern choice, giving Arwen a much more prominent role. That's a modern choice that worked, in my opinion, very well. Because let's be honest, Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, Tolkien's works in general, there aren't a lot of really strong female parts in those stories. So Peter Jackson and his crew understood we need a more female participation in this story, and they gave Arwen a more prominent role. Still, sorry, Glorfindel, that is a smart decision, in my opinion. Yes, it changed the story. Okay, but it's an adaptation. It's not supposed to be a beat for beat repetition of the original. And if it were, it would be terrible. Trust me. You don't actually want what you think you want in this case. I think you don't really want a beat for beat repetition of the book because that's not going to be very good.
And
No.
one of the fascinating things about this, for all of the talk of, oh, it deviated from the source material, or it changed canon, or it changed the lore, that quite often the same people will love an adaptation, but they haven't read the source material. So a different adaptation that has deviated from the lore, has broken canon, has done all of these things, but they love it because, oh, but this was really good. And this is the difference. If deviation from the text was intrinsically bad, then even if you have not read the text, it would make the adaptation bad.
Right.
But clearly it's not. This is about reader and viewer information, and about the expectations that, again, we project onto something. So something like Wheel of Time, season 1 had significant issues. Rings of Power season 1 had significant issues.
Mm-hmm.
I don't agree with every adaptive choice that they have made, and I think both series made quite foundational errors in the very foundation of what they are doing, which have had ramifications and expressions in every single season. And you go, okay, well, now that I've identified that, let's see what it is actually doing and whether or not I enjoy it. And for the most part, I've enjoyed Wheel of Time and Rings of Power. Do I think they're the greatest fantasy shows ever made? No. Do I think they're the worst? No, I've seen Legend of the Seeker.
Yeah. Oh my God.
I've seen the adaptation that they made of Terry Brooks' Shannara. I've seen the Legends of Hercules. Like, there's something that did it deviate from the source material? Oh no, it was absolutely true to all of the legendary stories we have about Hercules, the sociopathic barbarian warrior who
who killed his own children.
I won't get into that, but the expectation. Oh well, they should make the show for the fans of the book, and you're like, but shows are made for a general audience, which is typically not book readers. So what all these adaptations try to do, and whether they succeed is a different thing. But what they try to do is they're making it for a general viewership and then including things specifically for book fans. But there's been an increasing sense of entitlement in all of us about, well, I wanted this thing. It didn't do that thing. How dare they? And then even thinking about it, we go, oh, well, it's because they don't know or understand the source material the way that I do. That these showrunners who have read all of this material and they're going like, but this is what we're trying to do with it. And, you know, they have these things. And it's someone saying, oh, well, they just don't understand. They're too dumb. Like, really? You honestly think that these people are dumb, that they haven't read this, that they haven't gone through it, that they haven't picked all these things up? Oh, you can't defend Legend of the Seeker.
You're asking for the impossible here.
It is impossible. It is. I've seen it.
Well, actually, you know what? I can defend a number of aspects of Legend of the Seeker. They shifted the audience from the books that Terry Goodkin wrote, which was adult fantasy ostensibly, and they were aiming at a more teen-friendly audience, particularly as a follow-up to Hercules and Xena. That was very much the mode and audience that they were trying to capture, the same audience as Hercules and Xena. Because of that, and because of the filming locations, they went for a much more hyper-saturated colorization. So as much brighter, sort of technicolor kind of things. Very warm. They made Richard as a character more heroic rather than leaning into the libertarian aspects that were in Goodkin's work. And they tried to simplify it in that form of a moral fairy tale to correspond to that younger audience. So for a younger audience, it was probably highly successful and interesting. Unfortunately, there is a weirdness that creeps up with this, because then you have the Mord Sith arrive in the red dominatrix leather outfits. And it creates cognitive dissonance and tonal dissonance because they don't seem to fit with the world that was being created for a teenage audience. That you have all of these, and I feel terrible. Sex kittens dressed up in bondage gear, and it looks really weird. But they really did try to adapt Goodkind for a young teenage audience. And I think in some ways they were kind of successful. Do I think it's a particularly good show? Not really. But then there are issues beyond that. But did it fulfill that time slot for Xena and Hercules fans, or who would have been Xena and Hercules fans at that time? Yeah, it probably did, and it was decent enough. But there are some terrible shows out there that, you know, the more you know about a genre, the more you know about a medium, the more you know about all of these things, it can influence our relative judgment about stuff. Because it's, Rings of Power is the worst fantasy show ever made. No, it isn't.
No.
On no metric is it the worst fantasy show ever made. Like, just go and look at some of the other ones. And that's, again, that sort of overly simplistic, overly reductive approach.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hold on.
We've passed the hour and a half mark, so I think we should probably close down quite soon. But I'm just going to ask you, Philip, what are you reading at the minute, and then we'll ask AP when he's back.
Okay. At the minute I am finishing up a book written by a fellow booktuber and his family. So John Minton over at Talking Story, and his wife Amy and his son Jacob put together this wonderful book called Discovery. And it's actually fantastic. It's a kind of sort of an apocalypse type narrative, and it's set in the early 90s. But just a really brilliant character work, and a sense of doom and dread, some horror aspects to it. I agree that AP would actually love it. I think a lot of people are going to love this book. So I'm finishing that up. And after that, I'll be moving on to the last book in Baker's second apocalypse series, The Unholy Consult. Finishing that up, which I'm excited to do as well. And and then some SPFBO reads. That's me.
Excellent. What are you reading at the minute, AP?
I actually have a couple of novels that have been sent to me by authors that I'm editing, so I can't talk about any of them. And again, this is one of the things that people go like, "Oh, what are you reading?" You're like, "I can't talk about that one. I can't talk about that one."
I sent him one.
And so I have stuff that I'm really engaged in reading. The next book, I need to be having a discussion with Philip and Joanna about Johnny Wirtz's excellent Wars of Light and Shadow. Unfortunately, because of migraines and being sick and devoting that just takes away a lot of your energy. Then the teaching and the work that I'm doing there, that you have to use a lot of your energy specifically for that for your students. So then coming home and what energy is left over, you're putting into editing texts, that when it comes to, will I sit down and read now? It's like, I can't read another word today. I'm going to listen to an ASMR YouTube video that is just going to reassure me that everything is okay. And then I'll go to sleep.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you both for coming on today. I've had an absolutely fantastic hour and a half. You have both given my Saturday afternoon some nourishment. So thank you very much.
You're very welcome. And thank you for inviting us. This was a lot of fun. And I apologize if I ranted too much.
Oh, no. I'm all here for the ranting and fireballs and shots fired and stuff. So
that's why we're here, man. That's why we're
exactly.
here. Thank you, Luke, for inviting us. It was a pleasure to get this opportunity to chat with you. And I'm always up for an encounter with a critical dragon, with the nemesis.
So you are the nemesis. Stop saying this. You, Philip.
Nemesis. It's in a book, AP. You can't. It's in a book. You're named as the nemesis.
It's in print.
It's in print. It's true forever now.
Yeah, because when the villain says something, we automatically, it's written down that he said it, therefore it must be true. The villain said it.
Oh, dear. So if anyone doesn't know, where can they find you to either find your books or your YouTube work? Where can people find you? AP.
A Critical Dragon, although I've been offline for a while now. I'm intending to get back to it as soon as things have settled down and I'm feeling better and I have less work. So I can actually get back to doing it. But I was also in the process of moving home, and a lot of things got changed around. Moving home, moving job.
Moving into Philip's house.
Yeah, well, I am trapped in his basement. He only lets me out 5 minutes a day to have a quick walk around the yard, and then it's back.
At least there are books.
But yeah, my YouTube channel is The Critical Dragon, and I will be getting back to it soon.
Fantastic. Philip?
Yeah, I'm Philip Chase. You can find me at this very creatively named channel called Philip Chase. And also, I am puttering around on other social media as Philip Chase 90 on Twitter and Blue Sky. And now I've recently made my foray into Instagram. So I'm there as Philip Chase 90 on Instagram now. I'm sure the whole world is excited about that. So
I'm just waiting for the Philip Chase 90 on TikTok.
You never know. You never know.
You never know. Oh dear.
I'm thinking, can you make a book review in under 45 seconds, Philip?
All I know is that tweet is coming back if I go on TikTok.
You can start the tweet trend.
That's right. That's right. You heard it here first, folks. You heard it here first.
I'm Luke Winch, and of course, you can find me on this channel. Please like and subscribe so you don't miss any of my live videos with excellent people like this, and also my recorded videos, which haven't been coming out twice a week the way I wanted, but they're coming out at least once a week at the minute, and then doing all my lives as well. So you can find me there. Next Saturday, by the way, I'll be talking to Tori from Tori Talks, who has been here today. Really looking forward to a chat with her. And then there'll be a recorded video out probably on Thursday this week. So thank you everyone who has joined us live. Thank you everyone who's going to watch the replay. Thank you so much. Your interaction and comments have been fantastic. And I'll let AP go and die slowly in his bed. I hope you get better soon, mate. And we'll be seeing you then. See you later, folks. Thank you very much.